main picture. So this will be my main chart. And this will be, we'll be publishing this chart in a paper, I hope, before too long. You can see that our units are million tonnes of coal equivalent. So China uses not million tonnes of, or million barrels of oil equivalent, or million tonnes of oil equivalent, but million tonnes of coal equivalent. That's very significant because that is what China is using most, the coal, so we want to assess alternatives in terms of coal equivalent. But it also enables us to characterise the renewable energies in terms of their substitution for coal. So the thinking here is to look at the China energy pathways, the total energy consumption, as a rising and then falling or flat curve. Now we call that a convex curve. And that will characterise the way that China builds up its total energy system, driven initially by fossil fuels. So, extending very rapidly initially, and then flattening out, and perhaps starting to fall even by the year 2050, and certainly by the year 2100, as energy efficiency improvements kick in, China's total energy machine will start to be becoming smaller by the century's end. So that's what we call a convex curve. But within that overall energy envelope, we see the uptake of renewable energies. And if we look back in the history of industrialization and the history of the uptake of new technologies, you always see new technologies being taken up through a curve that is called the logistic curve. And that starts slowly, then it builds up. Halfway along, you've got the most rapid increase, and then as the diffusion approaches its limits, it starts to level off. In this case, it will have to level off below China's overall energy envelope. How much below we can only guess at this point, as far out as 2100. So what I'm showing you here is two kinds of dynamics, two kinds of curves. A convex curve governing the total energy system, and in particular the fossil fuel energy system in China. And then a logistic curve governing the uptake of the new renewables. So to go back to the last slide, what we've got in our perspective on the whole China energy dynamic is these two curves, a convex curve governing fossil fuel build-up and the eventual phase-out of fossil fuels. China's moving beyond fossil fuels, and then a logistic curve governing the take-up of the renewables and nuclear. That, I would argue, gives you a powerful analytical handle on what is going on in China, these two kinds of curves, because we'll use those curves to then look at each of these topics in particular. And it will also give us a handle on the total carbon emissions from China's industrialization and the total effect that will have on carbon dioxide levels, which we say will drive carbon dioxide levels up by 50 parts per million. That is China's industrialization cost. The cost in terms of the world's global atmosphere will probably be, we're not just talking scenarios here, this is what we actually believe will happen. We believe the cost of China's industrialization will be 100 gigatons, that is 100 billion tons of carbon extra in the atmosphere, driving carbon dioxide levels up by a further 50 parts per million. Now, the world is currently at around 383 parts per million. An extra 50 will drive it up to 433. Just a little bit below the 450 parts per million that the IPCC tell us is the danger transition point. So China's industrialization can be seen to be perhaps a gamble with the future of the planet. But China's perspective on that is the West may play the original gamble, and the West emitted not 100 gigatons of carbon, but 200 gigatons of carbon. And the West, including Japan, have driven up the carbon dioxide levels by a lot more than 50 parts per million. So that's China's perspective on this. Yes, it is going to add a lot of carbon in the coming years, and it is going to drive up carbon dioxide levels. But China's perspective on that is that the atmosphere can just accommodate it, and it's a lot less than was contributed by the earlier industrialising countries. So let me take you through this particular perspective on China's industrialisation, focusing on these two curves and the way they give us a capacity to think about the dynamics of China's approach. But always looking at the total picture. So here are the total carbon emissions. For as long as China goes on burning fossil fuels, it will be emitting carbon. But by the phase out of fossil fuels by the end of the 21st century, we see China's emissions of carbon peaking around 2040. So we see China's emissions of carbon increasing right up to about 2040 and then declining. And in particular, carbon emissions from coal we see probably peaking around 2030. So we don't hold out any prospect of China reducing its carbon emissions and for at least another 20 years, and quite possibly more.